everybody, it is Katie here from the Queen of Teen Fiction, and it's time to talk about the books that I read in October. So the first book that I've been reading slowly throughout the month is Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. As you might have seen in one of my previous videos, I was planning to do a reread of Carry On to celebrate a year since it was first released, a year since it completely ruined my life. So that's exactly what I did. I've been reading it little bits at a time to spread it out throughout the month. It was great to reread it and relive it all again. I love this book so much. It is one of my favourite books of all time. I just love these characters and this world, and yeah. I got just as emotional the second time around. When I first read this last October, it put me in the biggest reading slump, so I'm hoping that's not going to happen again. Because now that I've finished it for the second time, I miss Simon and Baz all over again. I mean, I never stopped missing them, but now it's just 10 times worse. I had a lot of fun rereading this, and if you haven't read it yet, then please consider picking it up. It will ruin your life. In the best way. So the next book that I finished reading this month is Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. Speaking of books that ruined my life, this one did too! I'm not going to talk too much about this right now because I did a half-hour discussion video on this book that's on my channel somewhere. So I've done a lot of talking about this book already and you really don't need to hear me go through it again. But it's one of my favourite books of the year by far. So whilst we're talking about this book, and since we've just spoken about this book, let's talk about two of them together, colliding. For those of you who don't know, Leigh Bardugo and Rainbow Rowell decided to go on tour together in the UK, and it was called the Worlds Collide Tour, and it was over 4 dates at the end of October. I was lucky enough to be able to go to the final tour date in Manchester. I had met Rainbow before, back in 2014, when Fangirl came out in the UK, but I was extremely nervous on that day because I was at the event completely alone, so I was kind of a mess on that day. And luckily this time around I was a lot calmer. As calm as I can be. I mean, I'm nervous in most situations. But I'd like to say I was more talkative this time around. I was able to get my copy of Carry On signed. So I'm very happy. So whilst Leigh was doing her signing as well, she had these little Six of Crows cards available to take away. Now I've seen pictures of these on Instagram and Tumblr and Twitter, and I thought that they were adorable. So when I saw that we were allowed to take one, I was very excited but also very nervous because they were face down on the table, so you didn't know which one you were going to get. And I mean, I'd be happy to have any of them because I love all of these characters. But I have my favourites, specifically Jesper, Wylan and Nina. So it was 50-50 that I'd get one of them. And I actually managed to pick Wylan. I'm so happy. I love this card as well because it's got him as Kuwait on the bottom as well. So it's special. I'm very happy that my instincts told me to select my child Wylan. So I did actually write up a recap of the event and posted it on my blog, so I will leave a link to that in the description if you want to check that out at all. It was such a good event. Probably the funniest author talk that I've been to. Rainbow and Leigh are fantastic together, so I am thrilled that I had the chance to go. But anyway, moving on, the next book that I read in October is The Last Beginning by Lauren James. This is a sequel to Lauren's first book, The Next Together. That book follows two characters called Matthew and Kate. They meet up at several points throughout time and they end up being pulled apart throughout the centuries for some reason that we do not yet know in that first book. This sequel follows their daughter, Clove. This is her story. How do you pitch this book? Time-traveling lesbians. I mean, if that is not enough to make you want to read this book, I don't know what is. Clove exists in a time where time machines have just been invented to solve the mystery of her parents. She ends up going back through time to see them in their different time periods. She also has a love interest called Ella, who also mysteriously appears in different time periods. It sounds confusing, but it's all perfectly explained if you read the book. I really adored The Next Together. I loved the different time periods and I loved trying to figure out the mystery of why these two characters kept meeting throughout history. But I definitely had a lot of questions at the end of it. This book answered all the questions that I had. And what I liked as well is that even though it was about time travel and it seemed quite complicated, everything was explained perfectly. so I was never left confused for too long. And also the characters are really fantastic. I adored Clove and Ella so much. So even if sci-fi isn't usually your thing, these two books are really interesting and the characters just make them so amazing. So if you've never read The Next Together, then I highly suggest checking that out. So the next book read in October is Our Chemical Hearts by Crystal Sutherland. I read this along with my book club. I've been part of this book club for several months now, and we always have a book that we read throughout the month and then discuss in a chat at the end of the month. So this month's read was this book. I was a little bit apprehensive going into this one because I had seen some very mixed opinions on Twitter. I never judge a book by what other people's opinions are because everybody has different opinions, but I definitely take note of my fellow bloggers' reviews, and there is a certain blogger whose opinions I usually agree with, and she wasn't enjoying this book at all. So when I was going into it, I kind of wondered what I was letting myself in for. This book follows a character named Henry Page. The story is told completely from his point of view. A new girl starts his school named Grace Town, and she's very mysterious. She has a background that nobody is quite sure of, and Henry becomes kind of fascinated with her. He's not immediately attracted to her, but then they end up spending time together and it becomes romantic. The book is actually supposed to be dealing with grief. It's not exactly a spoiler if I tell you this, because the book's kind of about it and you figure it out pretty soon on, but Grace's boyfriend died in a car crash. And so this book is about her grief and the way Henry deals with getting into a romantic relationship with somebody who is grieving. The reason why I didn't really enjoy this book is because I didn't like Henry as a character. I feel like he's somebody that I should like because he's quite geeky. He makes a lot of fandom references. He's the type of person that I'd see myself getting along with in real life. If he was a real person, I'd want to talk to him. But as a character in this book, he just annoyed me, and he kind of overshadowed any of the raw emotions in the book. One thing I felt is that it didn't really deal with grief that well, considering it's supposed to be about grief. Every time Grace had these genuine moments of sadness where she was trying to open up and talk about her grief, Henry would say or think something that was completely inappropriate for that time, or at least that's how I felt. Just his behaviour did not appeal to me at all. I can't remember it exactly, but there is a scene where Grace is talking about her boyfriend and what she's going through, and because Henry's put his foot in it, he spends the whole scene thinking, I want to kill myself, I want to die. I just didn't think that was appropriate, and it took away from the raw emotion of the scene for Grace. There were lots of little things like that about this book that annoyed me. Also, there is one character in here that I really did like, and her name was Lola, and she calls herself the diversity triple threat because she's a lesbian and she's a person of colour. To me, that didn't feel like the author was aiming for genuine diversity. It felt like a way of cheating because you're throwing all of your diversity in one character and then making a joke about them being a diversity triple threat. Yeah, I didn't really enjoy that. And also, it doesn't really focus on Lola that much, which is a shame because she was the only character that I liked. It felt like a lot of the characters in this book existed just to tick boxes. They were written a certain way to be quirky, but it didn't feel that way, it just felt uncomfortable. It also felt like it was trying to be relatable, but it didn't really feel relatable. Like the language and stuff in it, it was kind of like Tumblr-esque, but not in a way that I enjoyed. So overall, it wasn't a book that I enjoyed for myself, but our book club was very split on it. Half of us really loved it and half of us really didn't. So it just comes down to personal taste, really. This isn't something that I would usually want to read. I like books that deal with topics such as grief, but I like it dealt with in the right way, and I don't think it was dealt with correctly in this book, and I did have a lot of issues with it. And it was quite cliche at times. So yeah, it's a shame, but I just did not enjoy this book. The next book I read in October is Lie, Kill, Walk Away by Matt Dickinson. This book is about biochemical weapons. It's about a potential scenario where the government could turn a virus against the general population. It's about how viruses such as Ebola could be turned into a weapon. That's something that I find interesting in books anyway, because it's something that potentially could happen. It's not too far off from what we could achieve in reality. So I find books like this quite creepy and disturbing. It makes you ask, what if? What if something like this genuinely did happen in real life? What would we do? So it was kind of a thriller in that sense. It follows two different characters called Joe and Becca. Becca's dad works for the government and has been working with these chemicals, but then he realises that something's not quite right and ends up saying something that he shouldn't to a journalist, and it changes his and Becca's lives. Joe is a very typical working class teenage boy. His father has to do things that aren't quite legal to get them enough money to live. Joe himself is a graffiti artist and he makes money by spray painting for other people. I really loved his character because he felt very authentic. This wasn't an act that he was doing to appear edgy, this was his way of life, and it was written very realistically. Becca is also his complete opposite. She's been brought up in a very different lifestyle. So I loved the way their two personalities were different, but how they were able to work together when they were thrown into this situation. What I also loved about this book is that the chapters are very short and sharp. Like, a lot of them aren't any bigger than a page. I'd not really read a book that wrote chapters that way before, so I was really intrigued by it and I found it a very interesting way to tell the story. It's also very fast-paced, so there's never a dull moment because something's always going on. These four characters are always in danger, but it was a really great action-packed read and I enjoyed it a lot. And it's also a fantastic UK YA book. The final book that I read this month is Some Tales of Horror by Edgar Allan Poe. In the run-up to Halloween, I had to have at least one spoopy read. This was my spoopy read. I have read a few of Poe's stories before, but there were lots in here that I hadn't already read, so I was looking forward to getting into them. Poe's one of those authors that it's quite difficult to get into if you don't specifically want to read something like this. His stories are quite twisted and creepy. There are some that I didn't really enjoy that much, but most of them are just great short horror stories. I definitely ticked my Halloween box for this month anyway. So that is everything that I have read throughout October. Please do let me know what you've been reading throughout this month. Do you like the sound of any of the books that I've mentioned? Let me know all of your bookish thoughts down in the comments. I might not have as much reading time throughout November because I'm foolishly taking part in NaNoWriMo, but I will try to keep up my reading. So thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye!